The greatest empire the world had ever known had conquered 42 kingdoms. Its armies had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and burned mighty capitals to the ground. Every ruler who stood against it had either surrendered or vanished into history. But one queen would give an answer no emperor expected. Far beyond the reach of the empire lay the flourishing kingdom of Zaruma, a land where golden grasslands met emerald forests and crystal-clear rivers flowed. Through fertile valleys, the kingdom was famous for its skilled blacksmiths, fearless cavalry, and vast gold mines hidden deep within the mountains. Merchants traveled for months just to trade in its bustling markets, where spices, silk, ivory, and beautifully crafted weapons changed hands beneath. Colorful canopies. At the heart of Zaruma stood its magnificent capital, protected by towering stone walls and crowned by the royal citadel. Every morning the city awoke to the sound of drums, merchants calling customers, and children laughing as they hurried to the schools built by the crown. Unlike many kingdoms, wealth was not reserved for the nobles alone. Farmers, craftsmen, scholars, and warriors all shared in the kingdom's prosperity. The people often said a kingdom is strongest when every hand helps build it. Their greatest source of pride, however, was not their riches. It was their queen. At just 29 years old, Queen Amara had ruled for 6 years, earning the love of her people. Through wisdom rather than fear, she was as comfortable discussing irrigation canals with farmers as she was leading military drills with seasoned soldiers. Every sunrise found her training in the palace courtyard, mastering the spear, sword, and bow before attending council meetings that shaped the future of the kingdom. Many foreign rulers believed her kindness made her weak. They had never seen her on a battlefield. Beside her stood those she trusted most. General Kofi, commander of the Royal Guard, and her closest friend since childhood, was a brilliant military leader whose loyalty had never wavered. Elder Nuru, the kingdom's oldest advisor, preserved centuries of knowledge passed down through generations, and Prince Malik, the queen's younger brother, possessed unmatched courage, but often allowed anger to outrun wisdom. One peaceful afternoon, as Queen Amara inspected the training grounds, the sound of galloping horses echoed through the city gates. A royal scout rode into the palace courtyard, his horse covered in dust, its sides heaving with exhaustion. The courtyard fell silent. The scout dismounted, dropped to one knee, and lowered his head. "My queen," he said between heavy breaths, "an army unlike anything we have ever seen has crossed the northern frontier." General Kofi stepped forward. "Whose banner do they carry?" The scout swallowed hard. "The Black Eagle of the Valerian Empire." A heavy silence settled over the courtyard. Even Prince Malik, who rarely feared anything, felt his heart sink. The Valerian Empire was a name spoken with dread across continents. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen before its unstoppable armies. Its emperor demanded complete submission, and those who resisted became warnings to others. Before anyone could speak, another guard hurried into the courtyard. "My queen," he announced, "imperial ambassadors have arrived at the palace gates. They carry a message from Emperor Lucius Valerius himself." Within moments, the royal court assembled inside the great hall. The massive doors opened. 3 imperial ambassadors entered in crimson robes trimmed with black, escorted by heavily armed soldiers. Without bowing, their leader stepped forward and unrolled a scroll bearing the emperor's golden seal. He read in a loud, commanding voice, "To Queen Amara of Zaruma, His Imperial Majesty Lucius Valerius, ruler of the greatest empire under heaven, offers you one final act of mercy. Open your gates, surrender your crown. Swear loyalty to the empire, and your people shall live in peace, refuse, and your kingdom will be erased from history." The hall became so quiet that the crackling torches seemed deafening. Every eye turned toward Queen Amara. She rose slowly from her throne. Without a trace of fear, she descended the marble steps until she stood face to face with the ambassadors. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked directly into the ambassadors' eyes. A calm smile appeared on her face. "Return to your emperor," she said, her voice steady enough to silence the hall. "And tell him, Zaruma bows to no empire." The ambassadors stared at her in disbelief. Without another word, they turned and walked out of the great hall. As the enormous palace doors closed behind them, thunder rumbled across the distant mountains. Far beyond the horizon, an army of more than 100,000 soldiers had already begun its march toward Zaruma. The war for the kingdom had begun. The three imperial ambassadors rode through the northern pass without looking back. By sunset, they stood before the towering throne of Emperor Lucius Valerius, ruler of the mighty Valerian Empire. His palace was built of white marble and black granite, its towering columns lined with the banners of every kingdom he had conquered. The emperor sat motionless upon a throne carved from polished obsidian, his piercing eyes fixed upon the ambassadors. As the queen accepted my offer, the lead ambassador lowered his head. "No, your majesty." Silence filled the throne room. What were her exact words? The ambassador hesitated. Then he answered. She said, "Zaruma bows to no empire." For several long seconds, the emperor did not move. Then slowly he rose to his feet. The sound echoed through the vast hall. No one dared breathe. At last he spoke. "For 30 years, I have expanded this empire. I have defeated kings who believed their walls were unbreakable. I have crushed armies twice the size of my own. And now," he clenched his fist, "one queen believes she can defy me." His voice thundered across the chamber. "Prepare the grand army." Trumpets echoed throughout the capital. Within hours, blacksmiths worked day and night, forging sword shields and spearheads. Stable masters saddled thousands of horses. Giant siege towers rolled from military workshops, while engineers prepared massive catapults capable of shattering fortress walls. From every corner of the empire, soldiers answered the emperor's call. Veteran infantry, elite cavalry, archers, engineers, mercenaries. The greatest army the empire had ever assembled gathered beneath the Black Eagle banner. Its destination was clear: Zaruma. Hundreds of miles away, Queen Amara stood atop the northern watchtower, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. General Kofi joined her. "Our scouts have returned." She turned calmly. "What have they seen?" "The imperial army is larger than we feared." "How large?" He unfolded a rough map. "They advance in 3 divisions. Their main force numbers nearly 100,000 soldiers. Another marches through the eastern hills, while a third protects their supply caravans." Prince Malik slammed his fist against the stone wall. "Then we attack tonight. We strike before they reach our borders." Several young officers nodded in agreement. Queen Amara remained silent. She continued studying the map. Finally she spoke. "If we meet them in an open field." She looked at General Kofi. "How long would our army last?" He answered honestly. "One day." The room fell silent. Prince Malik stared at his sister. "Then what do we do?" The queen slowly placed her hand upon the map. "We refuse to fight the battle they expect." She pointed toward the winding forests north of Zaruma, then to the narrow mountain passes, finally to a deep valley surrounded by towering cliffs. "We know this land." "They do not." A small smile crossed Elder Neru's face. "The old battle roads." Queen Amara nodded. "Our ancestors built hidden paths through these forests centuries ago. They left traps where enemies would never think to look." General Kofi understood immediately. "You intend to draw them into the Red Valley." The queen smiled. "I intend to let their own confidence defeat them." Across Zaruma, preparations began. Farmers gathered the harvest early and stored grain inside hidden underground granaries. Women and craftsmen forged arrows by the thousands. Blacksmiths repaired armor from sunrise until long after nightfall. Young volunteers carried water and supplies to soldiers training outside the city walls. Even children helped weave camouflage nets for hidden archers. No one complained. No one fled. Every citizen understood what was at stake. They were not simply defending a kingdom. They were defending their home. 3 days later, a scout burst into the royal war room. "My queen, the imperial army has crossed the River Katter." "How far?" "Less than 2 days away." Queen Amara calmly rolled up the map before her. "Send every unit to their assigned positions." General Kofi bowed. "It will be done." Prince Malik fastened his sword to his belt. "When do we attack?" The queen looked toward the northern mountains. "When the empire believes it has already won." The next morning, the first rays of sunlight touched the hills north of Zaruma. A lone shepherd watching from a rocky cliff suddenly froze. Far beyond the horizon, a dark line began to appear. It stretched farther and farther until it covered the entire landscape. Thousands of soldiers, thousands of horses, hundreds of banners fluttering in the wind. The ground trembled beneath their marching feet. The grand army of the Valerian Empire had arrived, and at its head rode a commander whose victories had never known defeat. General Cassian. He raised his sword toward the distant walls of Zaruma. Then he smiled. By tomorrow, this kingdom will belong to the Empire, but hidden high above the valley unseen by every imperial soldier. Queen Amara's archers quietly drew their bowstrings. The morning mist drifted silently through the towering cliffs of the Red Valley. General Cassian rode at the head of the imperial army, studying the narrow pass. Before him, the crimson stone walls rose high on both sides, leaving only a single road wide enough for soldiers to march. One of his captains frowned. My general, this valley feels like a trap. Cassian glanced around before shaking his head. Queen Amara is retreating because she knows she cannot defeat us. He pointed toward the distant hills. Keep moving. Behind him, nearly 100,000 imperial soldiers advanced. In perfect formation, their shields gleamed beneath the rising sun as drums echoed through the valley. Far above them, hidden among the rocks and trees, hundreds of Zaruman warriors watched in complete silence. No armor reflected the sunlight. No voice disturbed the wind. Every soldier waited for one signal. At the highest cliff stood Queen Amara beside General Kofi. She watched the endless line of enemy troops snake deeper into the valley. Prince Malik gripped his spear tightly. They're almost all inside. General Kofi remained calm. Not yet. The queen never took her eyes off the enemy. The head has entered. The middle is trapped. But the tail can still escape. Minutes passed. The imperial army continued marching, completely unaware that thousands of unseen eyes followed every step. Finally, the last supply wagons rolled into the valley. Queen Amara slowly raised her right hand. Every Zaruman warrior held their breath. Then, she closed her fist. A deep horn echoed across the mountains. Boom! The earth shook. Massive boulders crashed down from the cliffs, smashing onto the narrow road behind the imperial army. The escape route vanished beneath tons of stone. What was that? Shouted an imperial captain. Before anyone could answer, another thunderous crash echoed ahead. More rocks sealed the front of the valley. General Cassian's eyes widened. We're trapped. At that very moment, hundreds of flaming arrows rained from the cliffs. The sky darkened. Imperial soldiers raised their shields, but arrows found every gap in their armor. Chaos erupted. Horses reared in panic. Supply wagons burst into flames. Drummers dropped their instruments as soldiers searched desperately for an enemy they could barely see. Archers Cassian roared. Return fire. Imperial archers released thousands of arrows toward the cliffs. Most struck empty rocks. The Zaruman warriors had already disappeared into hidden tunnels carved generations earlier by mountain tribes loyal to the kingdom. Moments later, they emerged from different positions and attacked again. Another wave of arrows. Another rain of stones. Another explosion as concealed barrels of burning oil rolled down the slopes. The narrow valley became a nightmare. Smoke filled the air. Panicked horses collided with soldiers. Officers struggled to restore order. Every command was drowned by screams and the roar of collapsing rock. Watching from above, Prince Malik smiled. They are breaking. Queen Amara shook her head. Not yet. She knew General Cassian was too experienced to surrender so easily. And she was right. Cassian climbed onto a fallen wagon so every soldier could see him. Hold your lines. His powerful voice cut through the chaos. The enemy wants panic. We give him discipline. Slowly, the imperial soldiers regrouped. Shield walls formed. Archers concentrated their fire. The confusion began to fade. General Kofi looked toward the queen. They are recovering. Amara nodded. Then we changed the battlefield. She lifted a green banner. Hidden Zaruman engineers pulled thick ropes concealed beneath piles of loose stone. The mountains answered. With a deafening roar, an entire section of the cliff collapsed onto the center of the imperial formation. Dust exploded into the sky. Hundreds of soldiers were separated from the rest of the army. Supply wagons carrying food, arrows, and water were crushed beneath the avalanche. Cassian stared in disbelief. This valley was prepared years before we arrived. For the first time in his military career, he realized he was fighting an enemy who had planned every step long before the war had begun. As sunset approached, the surviving imperial soldiers finally forced their way out of the shattered valley. Thousands had fallen. Most of their supplies were gone. Their confidence had vanished at El. High above the battlefield, Queen Amara watched the battered army retreat. General Kofi smiled. Today the Empire learned that Zaruma cannot be conquered by strength alone. The Queen remained thoughtful. No, they learned only our first lesson. Far to the north, an exhausted imperial messenger mounted a fresh horse and rode through the night toward the Emperor's capital. He carried a report no one believed could exist. When he reached the imperial palace 2 days later, he fell to one knee before Emperor Lucius. The Emperor broke the royal seal and began to read. With every line, his expression grew darker. Finally, he crushed the scroll in his hand. One sentence echoed through the silent throne room. Your Majesty, Queen Amara has defeated General Cassian's first campaign. The Emperor slowly rose from his throne. His eyes burned with fury. If Cassian cannot break her, he turned toward his council. Then I will send the full might of the Empire. The defeat at the Red Valley sent shockwaves across the Valerian Empire. For the first time in decades, stories spread of an army that had been forced to retreat, not by a larger force, but by a single queen who knew her land better than any invading general. In the imperial capital, the throne room stood silent. Emperor Lucius Valerius stared at the battle report lying before him. Broken supply lines, thousands of dead soldiers, destroyed siege weapons, a failed campaign. Without warning, he swept the scroll from the table. It landed at the feet of General Cassian. You promised me victory. Cassian lowered his head. I underestimated Queen Amara. The Emperor's voice grew cold. That mistake cost the Empire thousands of soldiers. Cassian did not argue. Instead, he stepped forward. Give me one more chance. I will not fight her battle. I will force her to fight mine. The Emperor studied him for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. You have one last chance. But this time, he pointed toward the map of Zaruma. Do not attack the capital. Break the kingdom first. A slow smile appeared on Cassian's face. I understand. Days later, the imperial army changed direction. Instead of marching toward Zaruma's towering walls, they split into smaller divisions. One burned farms. Another captured villages. A third seized bridges and river crossings. Their goal was simple. If they could not defeat Queen Amara's army, they would starve it. Smoke soon rose across the northern countryside. Farmers fled with their families. Fields ready for harvest burned beneath black clouds. Storage barns collapsed into flames. Villagers carried what little food they could before escaping into the forests. One evening, survivors arrived at the capital. Among them was an elderly woman carrying her frightened granddaughter. She knelt before Queen Amara. They burned everything. Our homes, our harvest. They spared no one. The queen helped the old woman to her feet. You are safe now. She turned to her council. Every family entering the capital will receive food and shelter. Prince Malik could no longer hide his anger. How many more villages must burn before we strike? General Kofi remained silent. He knew the prince spoke from his heart. But Queen Amara answered calmly. Cassian wants us to lose our patience. If we chase every attack, we leave the capital exposed. Prince Malik clenched his fists. So we do nothing. The queen looked directly at him. We protect our people. Then we choose the battlefield. Not him. That night, scouts returned with troubling news. My queen, the imperial army has divided into 5 columns. They never stay in one place. They attack, then disappear. Elder Nuru, slowly unrolled an ancient map. There is only one way to stop them. General Kofi recognized the location immediately. The Whispering Forest. Nuru nodded. The forest is too dense for a large army, but small groups can move through it unseen. Queen Amara's eyes brightened. If Cassian wishes to become a shadow, she smiled, then we shall become the darkness. For the next several nights, Zaruma's warriors vanished into the forests. They traveled without torches, without drums, without banners. Under the cover of darkness, they struck imperial supply wagons before disappearing among the trees. Bridges collapsed behind retreating soldiers. Food stores caught fire. Messenger horses vanished. Every morning Cassian awoke to discover another part of supply chain had disappeared. His officers grew frustrated. They attack like ghosts. They refuse open battle. They know every path. Cassian slammed his hand against the command table. No army can hide forever. At that moment, a young officer rushed into the command tent. "My general, we captured one of Zaruma's scouts." Cassian smiled for the first time in days. "Bring him in." The prisoner was dragged before him. His hands were bound, but his eyes showed no fear. Cassian leaned closer. "Tell me where Queen Amara is preparing her next attack." The scout remained silent. Cassian waited. Still nothing. Finally, the scout smiled. "You are asking the wrong question." Cassian narrowed his eyes. "And what is the right question?" The scout answered quietly. "You should be asking where she is right now." Before Cassian could respond, a war horn echoed through the night. Then another. Then another. Suddenly, flaming arrows streaked across the dark sky. One landed on a wagon filled with oil. Another struck a pile of dry timber. Within seconds, the imperial camp erupted into flames. Soldiers rushed in every direction. Horses broke free from their ropes. Smoke swallowed the camp. Outside the burning camp, hidden among the trees, Queen Amara watched the chaos unfold. General Kofi rode beside her. "The attack is working." The queen nodded.